Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Through the Fire and the SBN Small Business Network podcast. I am your host, Ryan Wickline, and today we are joined by another fellow Ohioan. He is Matt Kutz. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. So the number one question the audience is probably wondering, who is Matt Kutz?
Matt Cooch is a lot of things. I asked my wife; I'm sure she can tell you. Matt Cooch is an entrepreneur, a professor, an author, a speaker. Done a lot of different things. My background is in athletic training in sports medicine, and I've been a professor in that space for just about 30 years. I've been an athletic trainer for 30 years. I've been a professor for about 26, 27 years. And I've written textbooks in this space. I've worked with Olympic teams. I've worked with collegiate teams. I've worked with clinics, high schools, all across the board from a sports medicine perspective. And, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, I kind of fell in love with leadership and human performance on the kind of the leadership side, as well as physical performance. And I started getting into that space quite a bit. And it was then that I started writing business books, leadership books in that space. And I joke about it with a lot of people. It's a long story, but I really opened up some opportunities for me to do some consulting and coaching with Fortune 500 companies, high-level executives, things like that. So I consider myself a human performance thought leader, both in both spaces, and kind of the physical performance, but as well as the leadership performance as well.
Yeah, I love how you talk about leadership. That's one of my favorite subjects to talk about too. Yeah, I find it pretty fascinating. Could you tell everybody what the difference between leadership and management is?
Yeah, sure. So that's one of the things that I actually highlight quite a bit is, so leadership, if you really break it down for me, I mean, both are valuable. One thing that I think is important we understand is one is not necessarily better than the other. Both are needed, both are important, but they both approach problem solving. They both approach people, issues with people from two different philosophical perspectives. The manager type is more transactional. And by transactional, I mean they work based on agreement. Their power is based on types of agreement between you agree to do this, I agree to do that, and things like that. When we have other spaces in the leadership thing, come on, that's my daughter-in-law coming in right behind me there. We have some very interesting concepts relative to how people make decisions. So again, a manager mindset person, they're going to make decisions based on what's best for the company, what's best for the organization, how our policies and procedures followed. Whereas someone who is a leader, they're gonna go by innovative, creative ideas. They're going to try to disrupt the apple cart. They're going to go against the status quo. They're going to embrace risk. That's more what a leader does. They embrace that concept of innovation, where someone who's a manager, they tend to avoid risk, avoid innovation. They try to keep in the space where everybody is safe, everyone's treated the same. And they both want the organization to flourish. They both want the people to do well, but they have two fundamentally different philosophies on how that takes place.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, like I've always heard, like most times managers, people get those two so confused because people in positions are more managers than like leaders.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing that's important to consider is for years, decades, in fact, from about the 1980s when managerial, I will say it got popular in the 80s, but they started doing research on management science in the 60s as a popular thing. And since then, when it was introduced into our society's language, they were interchangeable. Leadership and management were interchangeable. But as we move forward, we started to realize, no, they're actually much more different than we first imagined they could be. Whereas, and again, it goes back to a fundamental philosophical difference. And today's day and age, they're not interchangeable anymore. Leaders operate from a completely different perspective. They have a different goal. I mentioned that managers are more transactional. Leaders tend to be more transformational. And their goal is to change the organization through inspiring and equipping people. A manager's goal is to maintain the status quo through policy and procedure of an established existing organization. So they operate at completely different frameworks.
Yeah. What traits do great leaders have?
Great leaders are compassionate. Great leaders embrace excellence. Great leaders are perceptive. They have the capacity and ability to perceive things and see things that other people really don't see. And then they also understand the fire, the passion, the need behind inspiration. And if you take those four traits, for example, excellence, perception, inspiration, and compassion, it spells out epic. And I think that's really important. Not that managers can't be epic as well. Managers can be excellent. But again, it's driven from a different fundamental philosophy of how you govern life. And I like to think that people who operate at a high level of leadership are always thinking about their track record. They're always thinking about delivering quality goods, quality products that are based on what they perceive in real time. They do that, by the way, through something I call 3D thinking. 3D thinking is the practice of understanding how each of the three dimensions of time work into your decision making. The three dimensions of time being past, present, and future, or what I talk about in my writings and in my books is hindsight, insight, and foresight. Someone who is truly perceptive understands how hindsight works, what it is, and what hindsight's telling them. They understand insight, which is what's going on right now in real time, in the present moment. And they understand foresight, which is their aspirational identity, or the company, department, or team's aspirational identity. So they're able to articulate very clearly who it is I need to be and want to be in the future. And then when you have an accurate hindsight and accurate foresight, then and only then do I believe you can actually see clearly what's right in front of you. So hindsight plus foresight enhances insight. And so that's what I mean by perception and how I teach perception. And then, of course, inspiration is just the ability to spark innovation. And leaders really need to be adept at doing that. It's what I consider one of the foundational leadership literacies, is they need to really understand, how can I spark innovation? Because here's the difference. Managers, generally speaking, so understand I am generalizing, but managers, generally speaking, look for inspiration from external sources. Whereas I believe someone who truly carries the fire of inspiration, like a leader ought to, understands that inspiration actually comes from within. They are the spark of inspiration. There's something in their spirit, in their soul, in their mind, something inside of them that they know how to exploit to stir up and to promote inspiration, not only in themselves, but then in other people. So that's what it means to be and live inspired. And then compassion. And I love compassion because it's really important, to distinguish compassion from empathy. Empathy, I think, is a little, can become dangerous. I know that's crazy to talk about. So I don't want to necessarily maybe go down that rabbit hole, but we'll still idea of compassion. And when you talk about compassion, you have to understand that it comes from two primary words: Latin com, which means with or alongside of, and passio, which is passion, how we traditionally would understand passion, something you're willing to suffer for. And we think of passion as something that I get excited about, something that inspires me, for example. That's really never what passion was, and it's not what passion means. The true concept of passion has to do with what are the things you're willing to suffer for. We use the phrase around Easter time in the United States, especially, and where we say the Passion of the Christ, for example. And that's really a truer realization of what passion is. So when you talk about compassion, it means to walk alongside of grief or pain or suffering. And that's really what we need to understand. So true leaders, I believe, understand compassion in the true sense of what that word means. And they walk alongside of their suffering, their pain, the hard thing. And so I use that to mean real leaders are willing to embrace and do the hard thing, the thing that other people really aren't willing to do. So if you take those three things, excellence, perception, inspiration, and compassion, I believe you have an epic leader. And ironically enough, that's the title of my new book, Becoming Epic, and how that ties into leadership. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. I love how you just talked about compassion. Like that just stirred up. Like, man, I wouldn't always thought about the other way,
Right.
passion as, hey, something within, do I have that fire, the burning, but looking at it as, am I willing to suffer for it? I mean, I love the way you frame that.
Yeah.
Here's a pretty good question that most people wonder. Is someone born as a leader, or can it be taught and learned?
Well, that's a great question. And people have asked that question for centuries. Are leaders born or made? And well, obviously, literally, yes, they're born. Of course, they're born, but they're also made. And this is why this question is actually still around for as long as it's been around, because the answer is yes, it's both. They're born and made. And what I mean by that is this, because this is important, because I actually teach modules and courses in the doctoral program that I teach in at the university is distinguishing between leader and leader, leader versus leader. And what I mean by that is, yes, there are people who have a more of a natural, inborn, or innate tendency to be able to lead. These are people who are born with charisma. They're just tend to be go-getters. They easily adapt in a crowd. They're usually not intimidated by new or novel environments. Change doesn't threaten them. They don't feel threatened by change. So there are people who are born with tendencies like that. But then everything that I just said can also be learned. So leaders are both born and made. I like to use this example of athletes. And, if I were to ask anybody who was the greatest basketball player of all time, you're only going to come up with 2 or 3 different answers. It's either Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, maybe a Larry Bird, depending on your fan, Magic Johnson. But it's a very, very small number. My point is this is versus me, for example. Now, let's just, for sake of argument, say Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was just born a better basketball player than I was. Yes, I know the stories. He didn't make his high school basketball team, and he had to work extra hard and all those kinds of things. I'm not saying he didn't work hard, but he was still he'll still be a better basketball player than I was, no matter how hard I try. Now, can I become a better basketball player? You're darn right I can. I mean, I can learn all the things, do all the things, put myself in the right environments, put myself around the right people, read the right books, and just create an environment around me that makes me better. So yes, I can learn to be a better leader. But then there's people like Michael Jordan, just like with basketball. I can play basketball every day for 10 years and still not be as good as Michael Jordan is. Now, here's the other beautiful thing about that. Michael Jordan, being born with natural basketball talent beyond me, still also was able to improve on his skill level. So that's the beautiful thing about leadership. Whether you're naturally born as a leader or not so much, you can still do the things to make yourself better. So at the end of the day, the real answer to your question is everybody is born with some leadership capacity. Now, what we need to do then is create the environments, and how diligent, how intense, how intentional will you be about setting yourself up to become a better leader than what your current ability is? That's the real question for me.
Yeah. What are some easy ways that somebody could like develop better leadership qualities?
Well, first thing I'll tell you what I tell my own sons. I have adult sons now, and how we raise and train them, who both are actually pretty successful leaders in their own right now. So I'll tell you what I told my sons, and I couldn't get more personal or real than that, is you have to find people who are better than you in whatever it is you want to do or become, and mimic and model and learn from them. See, most people get insecure around people who are better than they are, people who can show them up, so to speak. And what a real leader, somebody who, what I call an ontological leader, is someone who just is, their identity is as a leader. Because there's certain people who lead only because they were promoted to that position of leadership, or because they have the title, they're the director, they're the executive, they're the boss, the coordinator, the whatever it is. So because they have a leadership title, they find themselves having to do leadership things. And when they're not on the clock as whatever it is they're hired to do, then they otherwise don't practice leadership things or don't think of themselves as a leader. That's one thing, one type of leadership. I think what I'm talking about is what I call an ontological leadership. And ontology is the study of, it's a word from philosophy. So if anybody of your listeners, you took a philosophy course in high school or college, they might be familiar with that term. But ontology is basically the study of what makes you what you are, right? So it boils down to the essence of your being, your identity. So an ontological leader is a leader who believes they're a leader everywhere they go. Whether I'm on the wrestling team, whether it's at the youth group, whether it's at work, wherever I'm at, I'm a leader, and people look to me as a leader. That's an ontological leader. And to do those things and to become that person, then you have to surround yourself with people who are better than you. Ontological leaders get that, they know that, and they're not intimidated by that. Other people, and that's how I can tell, by the way, when I'm doing a litmus test, and whether it's other students, other kids, other professionals, and I look to see how they react and respond to find someone better than you. If they feel intimidated by that, or embarrassed by that, or maybe that's something they can't do, then I know they might not be the type of leader that I need or want. I need someone who knows that there are people that are better than they are, and they want to try to achieve that level. So the first thing I think anybody worth their salt in a leadership space needs to do is find someone better than you, someone who you admire as a leader. Pick their brain, spend time with them, follow them around, ask them questions, and learn from them. I think that's the number one thing anybody can do to develop leadership.
Yeah, great advice right there. I know from my own personal story, like I had to learn how to become a better leader, and that was the one way I did that, was go pick other people's brains.
Right.
In 2023, you were diagnosed with prostate cancer. How has that battle reshaped your view on personal development and leadership? Hello?
I lost you.
Oh,
There we go.
did you hear my question?
We shut down. We lost each other for a minute there.
Yeah. Did you hear my question? So in 2023, you were diagnosed with prostate cancer. No?
Yes, I was.
How has that battle reshaped your view on personal development and leadership?
Whew, that's a great question. In November of 23, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. One of the things that's challenging about that was I was initially under the impression, both me and all the physicians I was working with, was that I had a very treatable, very easy kind of prostate cancer. If there's such a word, I use easy in air quotes there. But and through the course of the treatments and the biopsies and all the things, we actually found out that I had what was later diagnosed as advanced metastatic prostate cancer. It had already spread to a spot in my bones, a spot in my lymph nodes. So now all of a sudden, what became kind of, this is an easy treatment to do. You don't need to worry about it because of your age and other things. All of a sudden, it's much more dramatic and serious than anybody ever thought. So when you're faced with something like that, of course, the immediate thing that comes to your mind is, am I going to survive? And when you think about, am I going to survive, that causes you to reframe everything that you thought you knew, everything that you believed. It's what Peter Drucker calls an incongruity, right? And it's one of the major drivers or sources of innovation. When something happens to you that you don't have bandwidth for, that you don't have the capacity to understand, or that is against what you think should happen, it's called an incongruity. When that faces you, you either die or you become maladaptive, or you adapt to it. And the only way to adapt to an incongruity is to innovate. So in my case, it totally caused me to reconfigure and reevaluate what I thought leaders were, who I thought leaders were, how leaders were made and shaped and formed. And that's why I wrote, actually, after I was diagnosed, when I wrote the book, Becoming Epic. And I also wrote another book, a memoir on the battle called Diagnosed. It's Not Your Battle to Fight Alone. And the thing that I learned more than anything else, the innovation that diagnosis caused me in my leadership thinking, was actually the subtitle of my second book. It's Not Your Battle to Fight Alone. And what I learned through this process is that and I've actually verified this through historical studies and other research studies and other writings on leadership, is that there's no such thing as an isolated leader. Anybody who has accomplished anything in the name of leadership or gained any recognition as a leader hasn't done it alone. And what I began to realize, and what I now am absolutely convinced of, is that leadership won't happen or occur in isolation. There's no such thing as the lone leader or a standalone leader. And it was the cancer that taught me that, because there are points in a battle like that where you can't just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you can't just, I'm going to tough this out on my own. It's not possible. The human condition, the human brain, that we're not designed to be isolated creatures like that. So leadership is the same way. Leadership, in my opinion, is mostly about overcoming adversity, changing, identifying an obstacle, challenging that obstacle, getting through, past, and over that obstacle as a team. And you can't do that by yourself. And that had to be the major shift that I had in my mindset from this, is learning and understanding that leadership does not, cannot, and will not occur in isolation. So it causes you to develop the concept of team, camaraderie, relationships at a much different level than what is traditionally thought about. I mean, most people will tell you, oh yeah, leaders need to be good team players and all that kind of stuff too. And that's true. That's always been the case. But leaders have to have somebody else to lean on in the hard times. And if you don't have that person, then I would say, or people, then I would say you're not yet equipped well enough to be the leader that you're supposed to be or can be. We have to learn to relate to people.
So you're pretty much saying that to be a great leader, you need to have mentors and other people to lean on too, to kind of guide you.
You must. You absolutely must. You have to understand that anything that you think you've accomplished never happened by alone. Yeah, whether it was the advice of a friend, leaning on someone else in a time of need or difficulty, how you even grew up. I mean, nothing that you have that is worth having, you earned all by yourself. I know that sounds crazy, because there's a lot of people out there who believe I did this all by myself. I grew up by myself. I had to train myself. I had to teach myself. I didn't have any fathers. I didn't have any mentors. I did this all on my own. That's just not true. You are telling yourself a false story, suffering from what is well known in the psychology research as hindsight bias. In other words, you're misremembering the past in your favor, which is why I mentioned earlier, true leaders understand the 3D thinking, understanding what hindsight is, how that works, insight and foresight, as I mentioned. And if you truly going to operate at the level of leader that most people think they are or would like to, you have to come to terms with the fact that you cannot, will not, won't, can't, all that stuff, do it on your own. You have to have people around you who will help you, support you, encourage you, all of those things. You must.
Yeah. I love how you talk about that too, because I just being around some of the kids I've been around, they're like, "Oh, I did this all on my own." It's like, yeah, you think you did, but
right. But there's coaches, there's team coaches, position coaches, technique coaches, nutritional coaches, parents, grandparents, fans, stakeholders are everywhere. Yeah, and they might have a small contribution. I'm not saying that they did it for you. No one's taking away. This is the thing I talked about from an ontological perspective. People who are truly leaders in that ontological sense I talked about, they have no problem recognizing and understanding and giving credit for people who help them along the way. It's the people who are trying to prove something. It's the people who aren't really leaders yet, but they're good, they're talented, and they're the ones that will say and get intimidated by giving credit to other people because they have a false sense of accomplishment to begin with. And that's true in the sports world. It's true in the corporate world. It's true in leadership. It's true in teams and groups everywhere, that we've got to understand that nothing by any human being in history was ever done great alone.
Yeah. You've written numerous books. What inspired you to become an author?
Also a great question, because I've never considered myself much of an academic. In high school and college, I was an athlete, again, into sports medicine, strict performance. I have several credentials as a strength and conditioning coach and an athletic trainer and all of these other credentials. Worked my way through college as a personal trainer and worked with sports teams. And so I never considered myself much of the academic type. I know that's an incredible stereotype in being sports and not academic. But what happened to me was I started to really begin to get interested in these topics, especially leadership, and realized how much leadership drives performance. Obviously, there's a lot of talent, physiological strength, all the stuff that happens metabolically in the body, and all this great stuff that makes an athlete a great athlete. But then there's something about a great athlete that is just another level. And most of the time, that is how they perceive challenges and obstacles. And I begin to study that and begin to look into that and how this leadership thing is really all about. And it was then that I realized that, boy, there's something to be said here. So I started, like anybody, just writing articles here and there. And it just, believe it or not, just evolved over the course of time to where I started thinking, maybe I should write a book on this. And I found some good mentors, talked to some great people, because I would have never thought in a million years that I was capable of that. But now I think I've written like 8 books, and one of them actually won an award. So Leadership Book of the Year several years back, in the innovation and cutting edge perspective category of that particular book award. So it was a lot of fun. That opened up a lot of doors for me. And then once that happened, I started doing coaching and consulting, which again is something else that I really never intended to do. But once those doors opened up, then people started asking me for materials and content. Then I had to do it to keep some jobs and things like that. So
that's awesome. What's probably been the biggest challenge when you're writing your books?
Time. That's an easy one. Time, because I don't just sit down and write to write. I have started the discipline of regular writing, an iterative process of regular writing. But I've never really encountered what people refer to as writer's block, so to speak. But what happens to me is I have this for lack of a better term, I'll say the word burden. I get this burden in my heart. I get this idea that's this spark that I just need to get out, and it's writing fast enough, typing fast enough, getting it out. So it's like I start writing and then I forget what I get on one point and I start writing on one thing and then that's not what I actually sat down to write today. And so I was like, what was that? And so it's just the time that it takes to do it. And then of course, once you get it out of you onto paper or a Word document or whatever you're getting it on and you read it, you're like, this is nothing. This is nothing like what I thought. It's horrible. It's that first draft. And it's just horrible. And it's like, this is worthless. This is no good. This is not what I wanted to say. I thought it sounded so much better in my head than it does here. And that's the hard part, is now taking that product and understanding that it's just the first draft, right? And then iterating that through the process of getting it to become something that someone else is willing to read. And then how much that changes through those iterations. That's the hardest part for sure to me.
Yeah. Your new book, Becoming Epic, is about to be released. Can you tell us what it's about and how it can help our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I alluded to it a little bit, but Becoming Epic really came from my journey through this whole prostate cancer thing. And what was interesting about that is, when I mentioned that I do a lot of public speaking and corporate training and things like that. And when I was diagnosed, one of the treatments that I had to do after the surgery was radiation. And I had to do radiation, for listeners who aren't aware of how that works. It's very specific, very intensive treatments, and it has to happen every day for 40 days. And so it's just nonstop every day. You can't miss it. You can't move one to this day, and you can't do one at 8:00 on one day and then 10 p.m. the next day. They got to be in 24-hour increments every day. So it's very regimented like that. So I had to cancel 40 days worth of speaking gigs, events, and things like that. And it really was tough for me. Not only is that a huge source of joy for me, but also some income, right?
Yeah.
So I was feeling bad, and I told my wife, I can't just sit around here for 40 days and do nothing. So I said, I'm going to make a challenge for myself that I'm going to write 1,000 words every day for 40 days. And what I intended that to be was just a journal, so to speak, just chronicling my story, my feelings, my emotions, all that kind of stuff, and, share it with my kids or something someday or whatever. And what it turned out to be, after about day 3, I remembered my model that I've used for X years, never really put it in paper before, was the epic, what I call the epic loop. And if you wanted to be epic, then you have to be excellent, perceptive, inspired, and compassionate. And about day 3, I started writing on that just as part of that day's, journal blog. But then I'm telling you, Ryan, I don't know what it was. But something just clicked in my brain. And for the next 37 days, all I wrote about was those 4 attributes, what I thought it meant to be excellent. What obstacles are there to excellence? What things you can do to be excellent? Well, what characteristics? I did the same for all 4 attributes. And by the time I was done after these 40 days, I had my first draft of Becoming Epic. And I actually told my wife, I said, I think I've written the book I've always wanted to write. And I was able to get that out. And I really, now I look back at that time of radiation, and it ended up being an incredibly fruitful and productive time for me. And it's about those 4 characteristics, or what I call maxims, these 4 leadership maxims of being and practicing excellence. Practicing excellence and being excellent, understanding how to perceive what's going on around you accurately, paying attention to what's actually happening, being inspired. And again, not looking for inspiration from external sources, although they're there, but also understanding that true inspiration comes from within, and it's a condition that you build for yourself. And there are a lot of ways and things you can do to become in that regard. And then finally, compassion, as I alluded to a moment ago. I show you a cover of the book, but I'm actually using the cover of the book. I'm using a stack of books that hold my laptop higher, so you're not looking up at my chin. But yeah, it's a really book. The subtitle is how excellence, perception, inspiration, and compassion can help you defeat mediocrity. Because the first 2 chapters of the book are dedicated to describing what I believe is plaguing the world today, and that's mediocrity, settling for just enough, settling for not being the worst, but not being the best, and how much that really, really hurts us, not only as individuals, but the people we love, the people around us, the teams we're on, the community we're in. It really hurts us. So I established what mediocrity is, and then what I call the 4 antidotes to mediocrity: excellence, perception, inspiration, and compassion.
Wow. I completely agree with you on that the world kind of and society has become kind of mediocre in everything we do, that no one strives to be the best version of themselves.
Right. And that's really what we need to do.
Yeah. When's your book going to be released then?
We're going to be out. We're looking for let's see, it's already the end of August. So we're looking at like a late fall release. So come out sometime in late November, early December. So just in time for everybody's Christmas presents. But yeah, it'll
awesome.
be.
I'll have to be on the lookout for that. It sounds pretty inspirational.
Yeah. And if you want, you can, I have 2 websites that are great. My one website is just my website. It's called MatthewKoots.com. And so you can go there and you can pre-order it there, and some of my other books. That award-winning book that I mentioned to you a minute ago, it's called Contextual Intelligence, and that's about navigating uncertainty and complexity. And so you can buy those books there. My wife and I have written marriage books. I've written a couple of the leadership books. Those are there. But then I also have a website called Battle for the Bulge. And Battle for the Bulge is a kind of a play on words, and that's for prostate cancer awareness, prostate cancer survivors. We host 5K races and events. We raise money for cancer research. We raise money for cancer education and awareness. And battleforthebulge.com, you can buy my book, Diagnosed, which is, again, just an inspirational story for anybody dealing with adversity and would like to overcome adversity. So 2 websites there for my information. Again, MatthewKoots.com and battleforthebulge.com.
Awesome. Can you share a story where you had to step outside your comfort zone to grow?
Oh, my goodness gracious. I've had to step outside my comfort zone so many times. I mean, even obviously a cancer diagnosis does that, but I don't want to belabor your listeners with more of that. I will tell you this. One of the things that caused a significant amount of growth in my life was the time my wife and I decided to move and take our kids to Rwanda in East Africa. And so we moved to Rwanda. I had an opportunity to do a Fulbright fellowship, Fulbright teaching scholar program in Rwanda. And, when you think about Rwanda, not a lot of pretty things come to mind. It was, back in the 90s, early 90s, there was that horrific genocide that happened in Rwanda. You may even remember the movie Hotel Rwanda with Don Cheadle and so you think of these things, people are killing each other in the streets with machetes and stuff like that, and mud hut. You just think of East Africa developing, it's not a wealthy country. And so we said we were going to do this thing and take my boys at the time, who were 12 and 10 years old. So we moved my family to Rwanda. And you talk about stretching outside of your comfort zone. No washer and dryer. My wife, I've got pictures and little videos of my wife doing our laundry in the sink, kind of a thing, old school way, and not having butter and cheese and going to this, no refrigeration and just all the stuff, black rolling brownouts, every night. You didn't know if you're going to have electricity all day, things like that. So that really took us out of our comfort zones in a lot of ways. But all 4 of us, me, my wife, and my 2 sons, look at that time in our life now, many years later, as one of the most richest, deepest times we had, not only as a family, but where all four of us can actually point to times where we grew in ways that we never thought we could grow, did things we never thought we could do. And that really equipped all of us to live, what I would consider, all of us, me, my wife, both my sons are pursuing their dreams, trying to live. And I've got now, they're both married and have kids and grandkids, and they're doctors and lawyers and all that kind of stuff. And that's fantastic. But it's because of being willing to go outside of our comfort zone. And it's began to be a lifestyle for us, because that's something else that ontological leaders do. That's just a natural thing to them, that is so strange and foreign to other people, is they know they have to go outside their comfort zone to grow. So, they put themselves in positions where they have to do things that are uncomfortable. That's totally aligns with what I was talking about with compassion. You have to be willing to do the hard thing and walk alongside of your pain and suffering. And that's what real leaders do. So yeah, there's a lot of examples of going outside of your comfort zone. And that means something different for everybody, but I think that's a huge one.
Man, that's some great advice. How important do you think it is for parents to probably teach their kids as they're growing up to just keep stepping outside their comfort zone?
Oh, well, if you're asking my opinion, I'm not a parent. I'm not a parent family counselor, but I have raised two boys. Like what's that one commercial? I'm not a doctor, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. So from my opinion, would be 100% absolutely necessary. In fact, if you're in my sphere, and if I have influence in your sphere, and I noted that you're not teaching your kids those things, and I had the relationship with you that would allow it, I would point it out and say, you're missing a major parental opportunity here by not teaching your children the importance of embracing the hard thing. I love that. Critically important.
Yeah, like I know from my perspective that I try to keep doing things that are hard, even though I don't want to do them. I mean, because it sets me up for when I do have to do those things, that are really hard.
And people are watching. People are watching, not just your kids, but the people around you are watching. It enhances your credibility. It teaches lessons. You become a model for other people. So yeah, I think you have to continually go outside your comfort zone. In fact, if any of your listeners subscribe to Medium, which is kind of an online blogging page, I have a Medium page as well, where a couple of years ago I wrote an article on the 5 ways to step outside of your comfort zone and how important it is to step outside of your comfort zone. So you can just probably Google, comfort zone, Medium, Coots, and you can probably find it.
Awesome. What are some of the ways you put down in that then?
So, well, I know I'm now becoming that, repeating myself, but you have to do hard things. That's for sure. You have to do hard things. And again, you've got to find people who are better than you. And I mean that. I'm going to take off my glasses and, do the professor look into the camera here. I'm not just saying this because I believe it's a platitude or it's something fun to say. I believe this with all of my heart. I mean, I am absolutely convinced that if you want to be better than what you are now, and it requires you to step outside of your comfort zone, it requires you to do those hard things. And it starts with identifying the things that you think you can't do, and then just make a list and try to begin to work towards those things. Identify the people who are better than you and embrace it. I mean, listen, this is especially true for athletes. I've worked with athletes for 30 plus years. And, you always have that person on the team, or even another team. This is a tough one, on another team who you just can't beat. who's just better than you, and you can't pin them, you can't outrun them. Whether it's a track team, wrestling team, whatever it is, there's always this person that just always gets you. Listen, swallow your pride, work your butt off, be the best you can be. But sometimes what you need to do is learn how to humble yourself, which is hard. And find that person. And again, ask them to be a mentor, ask them to develop a relationship. What is it? What can I do to make myself better than you? Or find someone else who you're willing to do that with. And it really comes down to all of those things I'm talking about, whether it's being compassionate, whether it's stepping outside your comfort zone, finding that opponent, finding someone better, swallowing your pride. All of those really boil down to this word we don't like called humility. And we have to learn to be humble and embrace that. And the beautiful thing about it is, if you're truly as good as you want to be, or as you think you are, then humility should come easier than it does. And that's another one of those litmus tests that I mentioned earlier when I'm talking to people. How hard or difficult is it for you to swallow your pride with something is a good indication of how willing you are to actually learn to be better.
That's great advice right there. What are your short-term and long-term goals?
Well, my short-term goals is to finish out. I've got about 9 more months of cancer treatment in front of me. And so I'm still dealing with those, dealing with the side effects of that, the medications, all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that I haven't been able to do because of the surgeries and the treatments is be as active as I once was. Before the treatments, before the diagnosis. In fact, I only discovered I had prostate cancer when I was training for a triathlon. So I was a very active, sporty guy, loved to, outdoors, hike the Appalachian Trail, all that kind of stuff. And run. I was a runner, 5K, 10Ks, half marathons, triathlons. And I can't do that now to the level that it was before. Now it's all I can take to go on a 3 to 5 mile walk, but I'm taking it because that's all I'm taking it. That's what I got right now. So a short-term goal for me is to get through these treatments, get off some of the medications that I'm on, so I can get back to that. Long-term goals is, just continue to try to impart some of these ideas to people. I really, again, one of the things you learn going through a battle like this is how short time really is. And, you think you've got all the time in the world. I was before I was diagnosed, even when I had the cancer and didn't even know it, I was healthy. I was one of those guys who didn't have any signs and symptoms. My doctors were as surprised as I was when we found out I had cancer, because I was training for triathlons, running, traveling, just came back from Australia, doing a bunch of things. And all of a sudden the terrible inconvenience came. And so I thought I was going to live forever. I was healthy and good and all this kind of thing. And so now I realize, okay, there's real life here, kind of a thing. So one of the things I want to do in the long run is refocus some of my energies and efforts and really take on this idea of helping people at a greater level, whether it's starting a new business, keynote speaking, things like that. It's really what I'm getting into now, to try to spread this message as much as possible.
Great goals. I love it. What's one book you'd recommend for personal development or mindset?
So, obviously my books, but I won't go there. One of the things that I do, I'm really blessed to be able to read quite a bit, and a couple books immediately jump to mind, but one that I'll give you 2 books that I'll recommend to your readers that just helped me. One is a book by Nicholas Taleb, Taleb, called Anti-Fragile. And it's a great book. And it's a book about introducing disruption, or allowing disruption, the hard thing, into your life to make you better. And it's not just about, he actually does a great job differentiating between being resilient, which is returning back to normal, versus being anti-fragile, which is returning better than normal. And so that's a book for sure, Anti-Fragile. The other book that I love is by Benjamin Hardy, Hardy, and it's called Be Your Future Self Now, and which is a great book about understanding how your vision of the future affects what you do today. And that's really, really important to understand, because there's a lot of people out there who don't see the future well, and it affects what they do today. And we need to change that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. How can people get a hold of you?
So best way is through my website. My emails are there. Ways to contact pages are there. So best place to get in touch with me is MatthewKoots.com. Excuse me. I also have an email, which is info dot mattcoots@gmail.com.
Awesome. Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
No, I think we covered it all. we had a great conversation. I really appreciate it, Ryan.
Hey, not a problem, man. Especially another Ohio guy on here. You're not too far. You're like, what, a couple hours away from me, I think.
Yeah.
So awesome, man. And you talk about leadership. Like, that is such a fascinating subject, just like you said. Like looking at people, how many studies have done on it, and like how one person will go do these certain 5 characteristics. Right. This person will do these 5 things. It's like, but they both get to the same point.
Yeah. The key I've learned a long time ago is there's not a magic formula for becoming a leader. The thing you need to do is commit yourself to whatever it is you decide that you're going to do. Be consistent with it, and stick with it. Because just about anything that you commit yourself to working on is going to lead you to improvements. And that's the big lesson.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, like I said, you always start out at a bottom level. You just have to keep failing forward pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Final question. What is one piece of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with about overcoming adversity?
So understand this. Adversity is going to happen. I think people fail because they actually think adversity is unfair. They actually think adversity isn't supposed to happen to them. And when it does, it sidetracks them. The best piece of advice I can give anybody is the same advice I give my sons, is expect adversity to happen. And then when you expect it to happen, it does happen. You're prepared for it, and it doesn't derail you.
Great advice. Well, Matt, thank you very much for coming on here. Like I said, it's my pleasure. Great conversation. I love your insight and your story.
Thanks, Ryan. It was a lot of fun for me too.
All right, guys. That's all the time we have here today. Remember, the only way to get what you want is to go through the fire.